Welcome to the Soul of Islam radio podcast with Ahmed and Ihsan-Alexander. The Islamic Renaissance is here and now. May the peace, the mercy, the blessings, and the light of the divine be upon you all. My name is Ahmed, and I'm a physicist, a poet, and deeply committed to sharing the fundamental connection between science and spirituality with our community and beyond. Ihsan is a spiritual coach, writer, and speaker committed to the evolution of consciousness within the global community. You are listening to the Soul of Islam radio podcast. It is a weekly program dedicated to sharing the deeper dimension of Islam and supporting your personal growth and spiritual development. I am Ahmed, and I'm here with my good friend and brother, Ihsan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. It's wonderful to be here with you guys, and we have a very special guest today.
Today's podcast is on music. Specifically, its use as a tool for entertainment and entrainment, its connection to humanity, and its purpose and place in spirituality. We will also touch upon the phenomenon known as the cult of personality and how it arises amongst modern-day secular and non-secular musicians who use their art to create a worshipful image that feeds ego consciousness. So, in this episode, we will interview Ahmed Pierstorff of Sans5.com. He's not only a dear friend and brother of ours, but he is a Primal musician and vocalist, a former rock star, a revivalist of communal music, and is experienced with various percussion instruments from hand drums to cajones to bass drums and more. He holds regular community drum circles where he teaches the use of percussion instruments and guides the participants in combining drum and voice to create a collective spiritual experience. His Sans5 EP titled What They Took is out now and available on Sans5.com. He's also a student of Islamic spirituality and is an RN currently working as a hospice nurse. Brother Ihsan and I are very pleased and excited to have him here with us today. Brother Ahmed, assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Soul of Islam radio.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullahu khair. Thank you so much for having me.
Alhamdulillah, Brother Ahmed, this is a session that's long overdue. We've been looking forward to having you on the program, and we've both truly enjoyed some of the drum circles that you've put together in the last year or so in the community here. MashaAllah, you have a wealth of wisdom when it comes to music as it relates to our culture as well as to our tradition. We're looking forward to this.
Alhamdulillah, I am as well.
Alhamdulillah. So, Brother Ahmed, I've also had the pleasure of being part of your drum circles, and in those sessions, I became aware of your rootedness in music. I was able to see that you had developed a structured method or approach to understanding and appreciating primal music. And you made it possible for all of us to participate and to quickly become immersed in the experience, mashallah. So to start us off, could you tell us about how and when you developed your interest in music?
Yeah, absolutely. I think music, for the most part, was a passive experience. There wasn't any intention around my exposure. My initial exposures growing up, I was exposed to the musical tastes of my father, which inclined towards jazz and country and blues, and the musical tastes of my mother, which inclined more in the direction of the folk revival that was still hitting the AM radio airwaves in the 70s, which is when I was born. And so that was the soundscape that I grew up in, and there wasn't really any conscious drive in the direction of musical expression until much, much later. When I was a teenager, my parents had split up, and that's not an incidental piece of information. The turbulence of adolescence is only compounded in a home that has been torn asunder by marital discord. And so what happens is that drive to solace is really, really powerful. So without anything to hang my hat on, when I became exposed through, I don't know, what we might call typical high school channels to music that articulated my sense of alienation, that's when there was a very intentional move in the direction of music. So there were kids at school that were angry and that were disaffected and that were rebellious, and I was certainly feeling that way. And friendships with similarly conditioned kids led to exposure to music that was angry and rebellious and disaffected. And that was a very powerful experience, hearing my truth articulated by other artists. And so at that point, music became a therapeutic tool. The music that I was exposed to was not music that might be found on conventional radio channels. And so there was effort around finding that music, around obtaining the music, around sorting through lyrical content. There was a lot of work involved, and that kind of discovery led to opening after opening after opening. It wasn't long after having been exposed to that music that I wanted to make music, and this was facilitated by my mother, who decided to trade me a guitar for good grades. So we made that deal, and I'm pretty sure I reneged, but I got my guitar. It was offered up in advance. So for parents out there, recognize what you may be enabling. In any event, I got my guitar and started playing around with that, and that led to meeting other people with guitars and other instruments and starting up garage bands. And all of this is around 15, 16, 17 years of age. By the time I was in college, I was in a band that was playing all of the local venues. I was living in Riverside, California at the time. We were developing a following. We signed an independent record deal in the area. We released a 6-song EP, a 10-song full-length album. And at some points, now in my mid-20s, the magic, if you will, of music began to wear off. There were other elements that were starting to creep into the experience of making music that led to a change in direction.
Ahmed, you talk about music as a form of therapy, particularly for someone in their youth or their adolescence that's dealing with stress, which is now a little too common in our contemporary culture. Would you feel at this point that that type of escape is particularly healthy or in fact really therapeutic? And also, maybe you could speak a little bit more about your personal evolution with regards to your feelings towards that type of entertainment or activity.
Yeah, you use interesting language. You framed the experience of music as escape. That's not how it started. It started with intentional engagement. There was a high degree of consciousness around, again, seeking, finding, and sorting through the material, learning about the musicians. This is all pre-internet, right? So, I mean, there was real effort involved. We actually had hard, at that time it was cassette tapes and LPs and things like this. And so you collected these things. They became near and dear to you. There were communities that would form around various artists. And so it was a very active, engaging phenomena. However, as I spent more time with it, the reality of escape being an omnipresent danger in when one engages with music became more and more apparent. So as a performer, you see people coming out to your shows. You see how they choose to conduct themselves, how they choose to engage the artists, how they choose to carry themselves, and all of the paraphernalia that goes along with attending a live show. people were enhancing the escapist experience of music. A lot of our music was performed in places that sold alcohol, for example. And it's the musician's job. It's the musician's job to sell drinks. That's the only reason they have you there at the venue. And so you lose a lot of energy as you're performing songs that meant a lot to you in terms of creating them, and you wanted to share that experience with people, and you find that you're really just a sonic backdrop for a lot of other empty shenanigans. And so it wasn't long before I recognized how the music was being consumed, and I think that's an appropriate word. And I began to have misgivings about my providing that kind of fodder for consumption. To touch on another point, the stress and the need for moving away from life as it is typically experienced into an alternative experience, I think is a very real one. I think the best music, and a friend of mine who makes a lot of hip hop music, he sensitized me to the fact that in articulating struggle, that becomes the real magnet for people to engage with the music in a more profound way, in a more meaningful way. And so I think the need to articulate struggle is a very, very real one. What I think we need to spend more time considering is how we're going to bring that articulation of struggle to the ears of those who would appreciate it in a way that engages them holistically and doesn't render them passive consumers of a sonic backdrop while they work to escape the struggle that's being articulated.
So you speak about engaging the audience, and from what I have seen from your drum circles is that you did it in a way where you created an immersive experience where everyone became a participant in the piece or the performance. And you also mentioned your friend who is a hip-hop artist, and he was able to engage his audience just by the content. So the engagement was more mental, more intellectual. From my experience, I found that engaging the audience would be done also on a mental or intellectual level, but on a spiritual level. Could you speak a little bit about creating the immersive experience that would engage the audience on all frontiers, on all levels, on all dimensions?
Yeah, it's a great thing to think about, and what's interesting is that we are thinking about it. In other words, there was a time in the history of humanity where this was so automatic that even to articulate it would have been thought silly. So if we think about, and you've used the term primal music, it's a term that I use, and I'd like to spend a minute fleshing that idea out. There are various theories as to how music developed, and nobody really knows for sure. But there is every reason to suspect that music, when first experienced on a communal level, was essentially rhythmic. So if you can imagine our ancestors a long time ago, perhaps working at cracking some seeds or some nuts, and you've got this woman over here and she's banging away, and you've got a woman over there and she's banging away, and what happens when you have a bunch of people banging away? There's this idea of entrainment where that pounding will sync up. And so you can imagine a community of people working, for example, of producing some food or some meal or some grain, collectively entraining and producing this rhythmic cadence. The rhythmic cadence then energizes the work that they are doing, and you have now a communal experience of music. Now, it doesn't take a whole lot of imagination to then move that primal scene to one where not only they're banging, perhaps somebody is humming, perhaps several people are humming, perhaps they stumble across this idea of harmony accidentally. And with each new addition, with each new sonic addition, the work becomes lighter, it becomes more lively, the community becomes more united, and they may be experiencing labor in a way that is considerably less grueling than it was was before. This is the idea of primal music. It is a communal experience where all participants are activated. Either they are producing rhythm, either they are producing melody, either they are moving along with the music, and certainly hearts and minds are captivated as well. So the primal music experience ideally would capture all of these elements, and I'm really happy to say that model is alive and well in many parts of the world today. We have to recognize that the current paradigm in which music is experienced is relatively new, and we're not talking much more than 100 years now, when the gramophone was invented, and now all of a sudden music could be recorded. Music is a very isolating experience today. It's the absolute antithesis, the polar opposite of what it once was in terms of the functions that it offered humanity. Now it's something that is downloaded, stockpiled, piped in through tiny little earbuds, and you could be sitting in a room with 5 different people, each person completely checked out in their own little sonic world. So it's this incredibly isolating paradigm. I remember reading an interview of, is it Jack White's from the White Stripes? I don't follow these things as closely as I once did, but anyway, I remember him saying that even the audiences it shows, in his words, the audiences suck. And he was asked, well, why do they suck? And he says, well, because they don't even clap. They've got their iPhones in their hands. They're taking selfies. Even that relatively passive level of engagement between the audience and the performer, the clapping, the cheering, even that has diminished. And so many people are participating in music in this very, very isolated way. So yes, to engage the senses, to engage the various levels of consciousness, to engage one's physicality, one's sense of rhythm and melody in community is really the goal of primal music. And it's not about coming up with anything new. It's about bringing folks back around to that original and still extant paradigm. And we absolutely see this in the world's mystical traditions. We come, of course, from the Islamic tradition, and the Sufis are no lightweights when it comes to communal music, whether it's group dhikr, whether it's something a bit more elaborate like the hadra. The idea of Muslims coming together, bringing their voices together in unison, locking together in rhythm. That is a healthy entrainment that leads to this idea, ideally, of hudur or presence, and in the parlance of the Sufis, presence with the divine. So, getting back to Brother Ihsan's earlier comment about music as escapism, yeah, it can be that. It can be that. But what I've just described is something else altogether. And I feel like that model is something that we need to spend a lot more time thinking about. And that's exactly what I am trying to do, inshallah ta'ala, with primal music.
Thank you for that. I just want to revisit the concept of entrainment. It felt like it is a way for us as human beings to tap into or maybe catch onto a metronome that is only felt inside. And it forces us to come together, to beat to the same rhythm, and to experience something internally. And if we were to look at entrainment on one end of the spectrum, could entertainment be on the other end? Because entertainment, especially in today's world, is a way to escape, just like Brother Ihsan said, is a way to forget, is a way to numb ourselves and introduce unawareness of reality.
That's a fascinating way of looking at things. I'm not sure that I would put entrainment on one end of the scale and entertainment on the other. And the reason I wouldn't, we come from a tradition where music holds a dubious place. There have been wonderful scholarly arguments, both in favor of musical instruments, also in support of the idea that musical instruments are not permissible. And I think it's because, so much of the experience relies, or is dependent rather, on the context, the state of the people involved. These are absolute factors that have to be considered in a discussion around music. So entrainment, as I've described it in the context of primal music, it's a positive thing. Pulling people together, working for a singular cause. Very, very positive thing. Entrainment as a principle has also been used by the entertainment industry to control or manipulate the behavioral patterns of the population. And so I don't have a television at home, and I don't know if these new HD TVs, plasma screen, LCD, all of these things that are out, I don't know if they function in the same way. But when I had a television, the old cathode ray television, the flickering blue light was a classic example of visual entrainment. And that pulsating light in a very particular rhythmic fashion would absolutely massage the brain into a level of suggestibility that wouldn't be possible otherwise. And in that suggestible state, one commercial, one message after another is lobbed at the passive recipient. And so this is an idea of entrainment being used for really, really underhanded, self-serving purposes. And on the other hand, entertainment. So entertainment as a kind of refreshment, entertainment as an energizing experience that leaves you invigorated and inspired. Nothing bad can be said about that. We all need a good dose of refreshment. Then there's entertainment, as Brother Ihsan mentioned, that can be a kind of escape, a chronic indulgence. And I would say that people who approach the world with diminished consciousness are more than likely to fall into that latter experience of entertainment, where it becomes distraction and it becomes a form of escape, time not well spent. So I'm not sure that what I would say about entertainment versus entrainment is it really depends on the context. But we should leverage what we know about these things to avoid approaching them from one direction and perhaps to facilitate embracing them from another direction, inshallah ta'ala.
So just to reiterate some of the points that have come up so far that you've brought to attention, Brother Ahmed, historically music developed as a primal experience that essentially fundamentally unified, created a sense of unity among the audience. There were, in fact, I don't know if that was an audience versus a performer. It was a one unified collective that was creating the music.
Yeah.
Versus the modern paradigm, which is relatively new, in which music has become fundamentally a solitary experience that, rather than unite, separates and divides and, again, isolates human beings. And in a way that entrainment is used at the same time in that isolated state to create opportunities for suggestion, for marketing, for programming, etc. Could you speak a little bit about the place of the primal music experience within Islamic culture, specifically with regards to the instruments that are used, the drums, which have historically had preeminence within the Islamic musical tradition?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. And so when we talk about primal music, at least in the way that I practice it, I restrict myself to the use of drum and voice, and there's a few reasons for that. The first thing is that primal music, in my view, needs to be really, really accessible and really, really possible. So both of you have been beautiful participants in some of the drum circles that we've shared in together, and what happens each and every time is people approach the drum, never having picked up a drum before, and within 10 minutes, and it's a little wager that I make with the group each and every time, and I haven't lost yet. Within 10 minutes, the entire group is banging out a rhythm in perfect precision. And the energy and the excitement and the enthusiasm around that first initial simple rhythm can never actually be reclaimed. I mean, we've met with in drum circles subsequent to that and done things that are more complicated, and that's always interesting. But that first moment when a group comes together and picks up those drums and sees how their contribution lines up with the contributions of everybody else, and all of a sudden it's rolling thunder, that is an incredibly exciting moment. And I think it inspires on a lot of levels. And I believe that the drum is alone in its capacity to do that. If I was to bring a group of people together for a guitar lesson or a piano lesson or a clarinet lesson or whatever else it might be, the cacophony that would ensue I think would be quite discouraging. Now, if we worked at it and we worked at it and we worked at it, no question, we'd probably come up with something really pretty. But the accessibility of the drum is absolutely incredible. Similarly, voice. We all have one. And unfortunately, again, contemporary musical paradigms are such that we believe our voices have to sound a certain way. And the voices that we hear are heavily, heavily processed, auto-tuned, compressed, all kinds of editing, and in the same way that the women of contemporary society might be duped by the airbrushed models on the front of a magazine, we are led to believe that our voices are not worth sounding. And this has huge, huge implications on the personal sphere, at the level of self-confidence. It has political implications. When you believe that your voice is not worth being heard, what will it take then for you to speak up? And so, alhamdulillah wa shukrillah, we come from a tradition that emphasizes there are no controversies around the use of the drum. There is no controversy around the use of the voice. And I feel that there's incredible wisdom in leveraging both drum and voice that go beyond simply musical. I think there are societal and political implications. I think there are communal implications. I think love is a huge implication, and certainly I have felt that in my primal music experiences with the community.
You know, subhanAllah, this is a fascinating point that I think we could maybe elaborate on a little bit. Modern music, modern entertainment essentially creates a cult of personality, where we become passive participants in what we're being entertained by an artist, by a performer who's very specialized, and how culturally this leads to the loss of the voice and to disempowerment. Yet in contrast, within the Islamic experience traditionally, when a group gets together and recites dhikr or plays on the drums, fundamentally it's an empowering experience. In your experience, because you're also a student of Islam and Islamic spirituality, how does the modern form of entertainment affect our spirituality, our soul, our consciousness? How does it affect us on a deeper level in contrast to the more traditional primal models?
Yeah, that's a tough question for me to answer, because it presupposes perhaps a level of spiritual awareness that I would very much like to cultivate, but I'm not sure I'm in a place that I can actually articulate that. But I have some ideas around at least the periphery of what you're getting at. One of the incredible facets of our path is that it is a communal one. There are other spiritual paths, for example, that emphasize isolation. There are methods of worshiping the divine that require seclusion. And although those things exist in our tradition, what we know is that all of the primary things that are asked of us, if we're talking about the salat, which of course, as I'm sure you've talked about in some of your previous podcasts, is related to the Arabic term sila, or connection. The salah is best performed in congregation, right? It's best performed as a group, and that's huge. That's huge. This idea of worshiping God collectively. I don't know. I don't know that there is another path that has this, at least any more than once a week, right? And for us, it's 5 times a day. We have this opportunity to gather with the community and worship God collectively. Similarly, we have the month of fasting, Ramadan, where we gather with our community to pray the night vigil. We fast in solidarity with our brothers and sisters. Again, this worship in community, and of course, the Hajj, which is beyond description in terms of the mass of humanity rotating around a single axis. So there's all of these communal precedents. I'm not going to hazard a guess as to why that is ultimately important, but for me it's enough to say that if it is this emphasized in our tradition, we really need to look at models that build on that precedent. And so practices that distract, practices that distance one from the community, practices that force isolation as a predominant mode of being, I think need to be questioned. So again, up until 100 years ago, even on these shores, music was a communal event. You might watch performers, but you had to go somewhere to do it. And it might be a ball, or it might be a dance, or it might be, any number, a wedding, any number of festivities, but you had to go somewhere in community to participate in that. And we've gone so far from that. And this can't be dismissed. This is not a small thing. Anybody that's hip to Roman governance, which is certainly a principle that we see made use of widely in the world, is this idea of bread and circus. This idea of if you feed the people and you entertain the people, they will not concern themselves with matters of state. This has worked really, really well. And the isolating experience of music as it is enjoyed today is yet another example of another Roman principle of governance, which is divide and conquer. So you have these two very, very powerful, time-tested methods of keeping people quiet that are manifest in today's entertainment industry, perhaps more so in the music industry than anywhere else. And I think we have a huge obligation to recognize that and really fight for models that absolutely destroy those paradigms.
SubhanAllah, that's very interesting. Would you say that the communal experience is a solution or maybe a method for the collective to subdue the self or ego consciousness? Because with the whole phenomenon of the cult of personality, it allows or opens the door for the ego to be fed via the attention, via the worship from the audience. Could you maybe say a little bit about this phenomenon, the cult of personality? I did a little bit of research and I found that it is a political one where it places a figure or a central figure to be the solution for a transformation in society, a figure that is worshipped by the masses. And subhanAllah, we see that today. We see that in mass media, we see that on TV, we see in music. Examples would be that of American Idol. We see many musicians that are emulated by people to the point where some people will go as far as getting plastic surgery to become that person or that musician or that artist. So from your experience or your point of view, could you elaborate a little bit more about this phenomenon and say a little bit about its place in today's realm of art and music?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't want to be overly dismissive of the importance of positive role models, right? So, I was talking with a friend who is an incredible singer. He's just listening to him is one of my great joys, and it will always be a great joy as long as he is able to perform. And I don't want to lose an opportunity to hear him by forcing him to blend his voice with the crowd such that I can no longer identify with him or identify him. And I was asking him about this, and we both came to the conclusion that the virtuoso is just as necessary as anything else. In other words, we always need something to aspire to. So if there is a downside in consciously focusing on collective or communal efforts, we need to recognize that the common denominator is often not representative of our highest potential. So while we've spent a lot of time talking about the egalitarian nature of communal music, and that's very, very, very real, we don't want to dismiss the fact that there are people in the world that can lead us to still greater vistas by virtue of their singular talents. Now, as with anything, there has to be balance. And alhamdulillah wa shukrillah, our way is known as the middle way. So I don't want to polarize the conversation by saying that, communal music versus, watching an artist perform, that one is inherently better than the other. Again, it all comes down to context. What I will say is that we're having this discussion in a very polarized context. That is to say that communal music has been essentially eradicated from the Western landscape, at least here in America. And so to get back to your points of the cult of personality, that is a very, very real consideration in our current times. The idea that the man would be greater than his message is something that we have to be very, very careful of. And all of this is aided and abetted by modern communication. In other words, before the advent of the internet and telecommunication and so on and so forth, celebrity was really hard to come by. In other words, a great man was necessarily that person whose works and efforts were so great as to have affected so many legions of people that he thereby came to be known. In today's day and age, all you have to do is get somebody's name out. He doesn't necessarily have to have any substantial body of work behind him. His name is enough. And it's easy enough to shuttle around that name that the name alone begins to force an imagination to construct an idea of greatness around that name. That's really, really something that we have to be mindful of. So in today's climate, forcing a communal agenda, I think, is important as a kind of balancing proposition. But we need to be careful that we're not polarizing the experience of communal music.
I want to speak just briefly a little bit about content and the nature of the content that's produced, particularly in modern Western culture, versus perhaps content that's been produced historically, especially within our Islamic culture. A lot of the music that we are now fed and consume consistently is generally produced by individuals that are often very unenlightened. The content itself is generally filled with a lot of drama, and perhaps most importantly, the complete and total absence of any mention of or remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator, the divine force. Historically in Islam, the mention of Allah pervades every aspect of our lives. And the Prophet ﷺ said that any gathering in which the mention of Allah is absent is a dead gathering. What is the effect of opening ourselves to entertainment, to music in the modern world, which is completely lacking remembrance and awareness of God, any type of gratitude, any type of presence with regards to the divine creator? What is the effect of that on the individual psyche, especially when coupled with the principle of entrainment, in which the individual, the passive listener, is much more susceptible to programming and absorbing the paradigm that's being impressed upon them?
Alhamdulillah wa shukrillah. I have been asked why I'm a Muslim, and I don't. I'm not real good when it comes to articulating metaphysics, and but here's the deal. Islam pulls absolutely no punches when it comes to describing humanity. And some of our greatest challenges as Muslims is that we approach the world from an aesthetic place that has us viewing ourselves in perhaps an idealized light. And we have our tradition to show us up. We have our tradition that points out the realities of human experience, and oftentimes they don't jibe with the sort of utopian experiences that we wish was the human condition. And the reason I'm prefacing my comments with that is we are characterized, humanity is characterized in the Islamic tradition, we are called slaves. We are called slaves. In fact, we aspire to a state of slavehood, or in the Arabic, ubudiyya, right? And we have to recognize that this idea of us being slaves is true whether or not we acknowledge a higher power. In other words, we are going to be tied to something. And what Islam gives us is the opportunity to be intentional about our slavehood, and to tie ourselves to something greater before we are tied to something lesser. This is the first point. The second point is that perhaps the greatest of spiritual practices, greatest in terms of the emphasis that it has within our religion, and greatest in terms of the effects that it has upon the practitioner. Perhaps the greatest practice in our faith is that of dhikr, that of remembrance. This idea of constantly reminding oneself through litanies or through actions or through cultivated awareness of one's slavehood, one's intentional slavehood towards one's higher power. So there's this idea of dhikr, or remembrance. There's this idea of slavehood, or ubudiyya. If we are not intentional about how we approach dhikr and ubudiyya, if we are not intentional about how we approach remembrance or slavehood, then we must realize as a necessary reality of the human experience that remembrance will be made in spite of us, and slavehood will be enforced in spite of us. We will not be a party to what it is we are remembering. We will not be a party to what it is that we have been enslaved to. And this is ultimately the role of the entertainment industry today. This is what happens when we approach music and television and just about anything without a conscious intention behind it. That remembrance, whatever the messages are, will be absorbed. That will frame the experience of our slavehood, and we will find ourselves, if we are gifted with the opportunity of waking up, and unfortunately, the reality is many of us will not have that gift, but one day we may find that we have wasted a lot of time. We have wasted a lot of time paying homage and allegiance to things and ideas and practices that debase our nature. That, Brother Ihsan, I believe, is ultimately the effect that we have to be the most conscious about when it comes to opening up our ears and our eyes and our hearts to anything without conscious awareness.
SubhanAllah. What practical suggestions might you have, Ahmed, for the average listener out there to begin rediscovering and reclaiming their personal power as well as their spiritual light when it comes to music, entertainment? What would you suggest for them in terms of activities they could participate in, or even activities that they might want to avoid? How to cultivate maybe perhaps greater awareness and consciousness with regards to what they allow into their psyche?
Yeah, it's a great question. I remember when I was in college, I used to go on what I called media fasts. That's really, now this was pre-internet, and it was easier, and pre-smartphone, and it was definitely a lot easier. And so what this entailed is not watching television, not listening to the radio, and I would try that for 24 hours. Or 48 or 72. And I would gradually push that out. I was somebody that spent a lot of time making music and moving, getting music out of my life was a necessary first step in rediscovering what it could be. I facilitated that through these media fasts. And when those got to be a little challenging, when the desire to listen to something came up, I might listen to something like classical music that didn't have any lyrical content, or else maybe world music that had lyrical content that I couldn't understand. And in that way, I began to distance myself from the messages and just focus in on some of the musical modalities that were being employed by different cultures and at different times in our history. So that would be my recommendation. Practice going without music for an extended period of time. Set a little challenge for yourself. I don't feel like there's any greater enemy to our consciousness than a television set. I'm not sure if we're allowed to say that on Soul of Islam, but if you really want to take an amazing step in your personal spiritual recovery, please consider removing that thing from your home and give it some time. Give it some time. And what happens when you start thinking for yourself can be scary at first. But it gives way to incredible beauty, and it will drive you, brothers and sisters. It will drive you to community. It will absolutely drive you to community. So those are some practical suggestions, inshallah ta'ala. Wa billahi tawfiq.
Brother Ahmed, before we conclude this episode, would you mind doing a supplication, a short dua that I, myself, and Brother Ihsan and all the listeners can join you with?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم يا الله يا أرحم الراحمين يا حي يا قيوم Ya Allah, we ask you, Ya Allah, that you bless, protect, and forgive us. We ask you, Ya Allah, that you bless, protect, and forgive our parents and our families. Ya Allah, we ask that you bless, protect, and forgive the scholars of this faith. Ya Allah, we ask that you bless, protect, and forgive the dead and the dying amongst us. Ya Allah, we ask that you bless, protect, and forgive those who are sick and suffering throughout the world. O Allah, we ask that you guide us to you through every human experience that you open. We ask you, Ya Allah, that you take our talents and our inclinations and you dispose us such that we strive to please you through those gifts that you have given us. We ask you, Ya Allah, that you ennoble us with your lights and that you prevent us, O Allah, from darkening this path with our darkness. Ya Allah, Ya Rahman Rahimeen, we ask you for shade on the day where there will be no shade. We ask you, Ya Allah, Ya Arhamar Rahimeen, to unite us in the garden, to drink from the hand of our blessed Prophet, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. O Allah, we ask that you bless Brother Ahmed Saqamini and Brother Ihsan Turabi, those who have gifted us with this incredible podcast, with continued tawfiq, that you increase them in sincerity, that you increase them in persistence, and that you continue to guide us through their Mubarak work. Ya Allah, Ya Arhamar Rahimeen, in these difficult times, Ya Allah, we ask you to make our path clear. We ask you to eradicate confusion with the pure and beautiful simplicity of your way, and that you grant us the courage and the bravery to persist in that way. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Allahumma ameen. Barakallahu feek. Akhi Ahmed, for that beautiful dua. May Allah bless you and reward you for sharing your experience, your knowledge, your wisdom with us and the listeners. May Allah bless you with your work. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala surround you and your family and our entire community with His light.
Ameen.
Thank you so much for being part of Soul of Islam Radio, and inshallah we would like to have you in the near future.
Inshallah. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah khairun, Brother Ahmed. This has been an enlightening episode with us, and thank you to all the listeners tuning in. May Allah bless you, Brother Ahmed, your family as well, and your work, and inshallah keep us all on Sirat al-Mustaqim.
Ameen.
And bless all of our listeners, inshallah, to grow in strength and in light and in faith and in himmah and in awareness and in intention.
This brings us to the end of this episode. Alhamdulillah wa shukrullah, and thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your continued love and support. To learn more about Brother Ahmed Pierstorff, you can visit his blog at sans5.com. That's SANSFIFE.com. We'll make sure to provide you with links in the episode summary. You can also find those links on our website at soulofislamradio.com. We would also like to mention that Brother Ahmed Pierstorff had recently released an EP titled What They Took, and we just learned that it is available for free on sans5.com. Please continue supporting the Soul of Islam Radio by liking us on Facebook, subscribing to this podcast on iTunes, giving us a review, and recommending to your family and friends. For more information, and if you feel inspired to support this work, you can make a donation on our website at soulofislamradio.com. To learn more about us and our projects, you can visit my website at ahmedsakamini.com and Ihsan's website at Ihsan-Alexander.com. And with that, may the peace, the mercy, the blessings, and the light of the divine be upon you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.